like to start, we're doing something a little bit different, and we're going to be drilling right into our metallurgical and geological information. We've provided updates to the market in August, both of the completion of our RC drilling at Quicksilver, as well as significant nickel upgrading at our Quicksilver mineralisation. Now, our Quicksilver deposit near Lake Grace is a 26.3 million tonne, 0.64% nickel, 0.04% cobalt, JORC compliant resource that was actually defined in 2018. And where there's been a lot of work year to date on this, and if we could just jump to the next slide, get past the disclosure, which everyone can read at their leisure, and then onto this. And what we've seen so far in the year is we've actually managed to get through a lot of work. We've repositioned the company. We've moved into our focus moving into a project development focus, which is one of the reasons and one of the major reasons I joined the company. There's been a lot of data analytics to date, and part of that work has identified the rare earth mineralizations and scandium mineralizations within the ore body. This is in addition to obviously the defined nickel and cobalt. We completed a PQ drilling campaign, diamond drilling campaign, which collected 1.6 tonne of bulk sample for our metallurgical test work program, which we have commenced and in flight, and we've announced some results on. We also have done a lot of analytical work on the rare earths in themselves and the orientation where we see that happening. And on top of all that, we had some spectacular results we released in June, which I'm sure everyone has been aware of, but there was we had our highest nickel grades ever intercepted at Quicksilver as a part of that, and that came from that PQ drilling. As a part of the metallurgical program, we've confirmed that we're certainly seeing high silica and no nickel rejection from our scrubbing work. And also we completed the Quicksilver primary drill program as a part of all that as well, which is an RC program. Now, if we could go to the next slide. So diving into the metallurgy, the key highlights for us have been mainly on three things. With our screening and scrubbing, we've seen significant upgrade, and we can see there the 111 to 226%, which we'll jump into detail a bit more. We've also managed to form a mica con from a couple of the composites. And what we're seeing here, which is really, really both interesting and extremely important to us, which is we're seeing nickel grades of over a bit over 2% to a bit over 3% in that vermiculite that we're seeing in that oxide zone. And that becomes really important. We'll talk again more to that as we progress through. And we're also seeing from the mag separation that we're generating a very solid, basically 0.7% nickel, 50% iron concentrate coming from there. If we could jump to the next slide, please. Now, deliberately put this slide together to allow people to get a bit more of a visual context of where the metallurgical results are in comparison to where the drill holes are. So while there's a lot of detail there, and I'm not going to go through every drill hole in itself, what allows people to do is see where the composite sample was for metallurgical test work and orientate that towards the drill hole that it came from. Now, and this is the scrubbing work. Now, what becomes really important here, 7 out of these 8 composites returned really significant upgrading of the nickel. And that's where, obviously the 111 to 226% upgrading. The one sample that didn't, and I will call out the one sample that didn't, which is from hole DD02, which is sitting down for everybody at the bottom of the screen. It's the leftmost hole out of the two. And the reason that didn't had a very low silica content and a high iron content. So it was very much more like a hematite style hole. But what we're seeing, but what this is really pointing to, and again, we'll branch a bit more into this in the geological conversation as well, is we're seeing within this northern zone, very consistent upgrading. We've got, a very good array of results there from the scrubbing results. This, of course, centers around, and we can see to the north there what that previous hole was that we had in June with the spectacular grades. And this northern centre of what we're seeing at Quicksilver is becoming a much bigger focus for us, not only because of the vermiculite that we've been able to demonstrate in the grades of that vermiculite, but with the level of upgrading we're seeing from the scrubbing work as well, which is really, really encouraging. If we go to the next slide, please. And talking to this, that's just the scrubbing. Now, getting into the microassessment or the vermiculite in the oxide zone, and for everyone's benefit, vermiculite is an alterated form of mica. And we can see there that, with those two cons, we've had those great samples. What we're also seeing is that, we've got a reasonable level of chromium. We've still got a level of silica in it, but it's a very clean product and it's high grade. Now, why is this important? We've already talked about previously in our other announcements, looking at our forward works, that we're already doing work on secondary processing opportunities for quicksilver. The potential of isolating the vermiculite into a much more refined product allows us, does two things. One is it becomes another product stream in itself that we look at either in an integrated fashion and or as a separate product as a standalone. And if we look at it as a standalone, then we also look at the secondary processing opportunity of that in a standalone product. Now, having grades of between 2 and 3% in the vermiculite really leads to highlighting that there's quite a significant opportunity of secondary processing on this. And what that allows us to do and puts on the table for us is, at least for one of our product streams, the possibility of having a battery grade nickel product coming out at the end, other than the concentrates that we generally look at. And in addition to that, so the vermiculite in itself is a big player, and it's turning out, and from where we're sitting, to be more and more significant as a part of this deposit. And thirdly to all this is the magnetic separation work that's been going. Now, we're getting a very consistent, 0.7% nickel, approximately 50% iron, and importantly, almost 10% chromium. Now, this is shaping up to be a much more product, getting a little bit more specialized towards the stainless steel market. Stainless steel needs about 10.5% plus chromium as a part of the mix. So this is, from our other deleterious elements, this product again is very, very clean. We're not getting many deleterious elements in this at all. And from this test work, and when we complete the test work, we will be able to start taking around 2 different parties to actually start to really price up what this product can do for us. So the metallurgical test work is demonstrating that, as I say, we're getting a very high silica rejection. We're seeing a center of mass around what can happen in the north for us. We're getting a very good mica product, and we're also developing a very good iron, chromium, nickel concentrate that's very well suited to the stainless steel market. And that's just the metallurgical work. But beyond the metallurgical work, obviously there's been a lot more information geologically, and I will hand over to Jordan now to talk a little bit more to the geology. If we could move to the next slide, please.
Okay, so we just recently drilled some RC holes in underneath the resource, which hasn't been done up to this date. There was some drilling done back in 2019, I believe, chasing some EM conductors, but they were further to the north. And so we didn't have a lot of information about the underlying protolith geology that was the formation of the nickel oxide resource. So if we go back to the start, where when we did the stage 2 testing, which sort of set us off on this path, we did some very big bulk samples from the existing RC drilling, the resource drilling, just to see whether we could beneficiate, basically try and separate out some products from the oxide that we can sell directly without having to go down the chemical extraction path or the hydromet path. And with that testing, it showed us that there was quite a bit of unique mineralogy going on in the oxide that was hard to explain as your typical laterite nickel oxide resource. And from that work, we're getting some excellent products coming out of that work. So our next step, of course, was to actually start doing some bulk sampling, and that's what the PQ drilling was. So the PQ diamond drilling was essentially collecting larger samples from specific areas of the ore body so that we could run all the tests again just to see whether we can repeat them at a larger scale. But what we found out is that the ore body is not as ubiquitous as we initially thought, or from the initial sampling, and that makes sense because we sampled all the holes and composited all the holes together when we did the original stage 2 testing. So we averaged everything out. So what the diamond drilling is telling us is that the ore body actually has some potential, some structure and some zoning that we might be able to take advantage of that. So and the other thing that the PQ diamond drilling demonstrated to us was that was this very high grade vermiculite, and it's very rare to get such high grade nickel in vermiculite. And the question then was, the next question from that sort of work was then, you know, it's very rare for oxide nickel to be of this grade. It's even rarer that we have a vermiculite product which is containing this nickel. So the question that we asked was that, is there enrichment in the protolith? And so that was the driving force behind the deeper RC drilling that we've just completed, and we're still waiting for the assays. You know, we're looking through this in the lens of a typical Yilgarn oxide deposit, and so our initial thinking was perhaps there's some layered, some disseminated sulfides at depth, and that there was some layering and some nickel enrichment, primary nickel enrichment, which might be of interest to us, and there might be some primary nickel. We completed the drilling, and where we're expecting the sulfide zones, we got these biotite zones, and this kind of makes sense to us now because vermiculite is the alteration product of biotite. So at the moment, we're very early days. The geology was a lot more complicated than, you know, what we're expecting. The geological setting is not typical for, you know, these nickel oxide deposits elsewhere in the state. You know, we've seen a lot of veining, lots of hydrothermal alteration. So there's been a lot of heat, a lot of pressure in this system, and it's changing the mineralogy. And that's probably the reason why we're getting unique mineralogy in the oxide, because these minerals have been altered and changed from their original source, and that's probably allowed them to break down in such a way that they're so easily, you know, there's only 4 components of the oxide. They're easily separatable into different products. That's what our initial scoping work was done. That's what it's shown to be done. It's still, that is the case, but what we're seeing now is the potential for these high-grade zones to be within the resource, and that these high-grade zones might be might have influence from the protolith, and in which case, if it is, we can predict where they are in the oxide, and allows us then to start thinking about transitioning or migrating this deposit from like a ubiquitous low-grade nickel oxide deposit into a high-grade nickel oxide deposit, and there's a lot of benefits in that. So it's quite an exciting development, and as you see on this section here, this is just a stylized section of what we're thinking is happening, is that these biotite zones, we're not sure why they're there. They're very unusual. They're in the ultramafic. They could be shears. They could be interflow sediments. We don't know. There's definitely shearing involved in there. There's intrusions and there's veining. So yeah, so this is all the things that we're still trying to get our head around. But these biotite zones, we think may be the key. And the worst case scenario is that these biotite zones, when the vermiculite's forming from the biotite in the presence of nickel, and we're getting ionic nickel.
We'll just go to the next slide.
Yeah, next slide. Yeah, please. Right. So so this is what we're just sort of talking about. So if so all this high grade nickel is coming in from the oxide and it's forming with the vermiculite, then in the oxide we're going to get these massive upgrades when we get vermiculite. If the vermiculite is directly related to the biotite underneath, then we can predict where the vermiculite's going to be, and therefore we'll have these vermiculite seams within the ore body that we can selectively mine. You know, this, so you know, we can then, you know, start thinking about high grading it rather than mining the whole ore body, and that's going to be a big advantage for the economics of the project. But secondly, that we're, you know, if the biotite is taking up the nickel and the nickel is already in the biotite before it formed the vermiculite, then there is potential for further primary nickel at depth. So we're quite excited to see what the assays tell us. That'll tell us whether, you know, the upgrading of the nickel occurred in the oxide or in the primary zone. But the worst case scenario is that it is ionic nickel in the oxide zone, and for us that was an excellent outcome, and it's an exciting development for all the reasons that we can now start looking at trying to turn this into a high grade or a higher grade mine, and by selectively mining out seams of vermiculite within the lower grade clay zones.
Yep.
So
next slide. Yeah, and just to comment on that from myself, is that identification geometric relationship to get to a high grade orientation within the ore body. And as Jordan said, it leads to that selectivity, that ability to accelerate grade, and all those things you do from a mining application to influence the project economics by bringing stuff forward in the plan and everything else, which is the structural settings becoming is really lending itself to the value proposition of when we start going through the study work. Just want to quickly comment on, to keep moving along, that it's really important to understand that we see an awful lot of value in Quicksilver, and year to date so far we've already invested $700,000 in effectively on the ground and geological work in Quicksilver in itself. There's more money in flight that's already still in the programs that are ongoing with what we're doing, and in the next couple of months that'll easily be up close to $1 million in what we spent, and that's great investment for what we're doing. We're getting really good information, and while there's a lot going on metallurgically and geologically, we're gathering significant data on this project. The part of that as well is it's improving our understanding, and that's really important. Now, while sometimes you open a door and you go, oh, this thing's looking more complex. At the end of the day, when we get through all the work, this thing will simplify out. It's complex at the moment because we've got a lot of unknowns. And I would just like to say that importance of understanding the ore body, the earlier you understand your ore body and the structural setting and all those implications, is hugely important, because the simple truth is the landscape is littered with the wrecks of companies that have not understood the geology of their deposits. And that's why we focus on the geology, that's why we focus on the structure and understanding. And not only that, we've still got a lot more results coming in pending. We've still got a lot more assay work coming in. We've got concentrates and further metallurgical test work. We've got, just on vermiculite, we need to do a lot more vermiculite recovery optimization, characterization. We've got more separation work to look at more gang removal. And I think it's really important, I didn't comment on it before, but a lot of the silica removal actually forms industrial aggregates. So the stuff we're casting off isn't waste, it's another product, which is really important. So it gives us, it keeps enhancing that value proposition position. We've just conducted a geophysical survey, of which we'll be expecting more results coming in as well. And as we talk about, Quicksilver is really showing now to be a much more, potentially a much more structurally controlled deposit that allows us to move away from this assay, this, as Jordan said, this lower grade ubiquitous style mineralization to a much more higher grade core type approach, particularly in the north, where we can be a lot more selective and where we can look at how we accelerate grade and pick grade out and advance in those product streams. I think we'll move across to questions. I think we've talked over time.
Thanks, I've got a few questions, and there's a few questions online, particularly around your vermiculite. So if you could answer those after the presentation. A couple here. The Quicksilver nickel cobalt project has certainly delivered exceptional shallow results, but how critical will confirmation of identical seams be for the success of this project?
Look, I think it's there's a couple of parts to that. One is we've got to actually, there's a lot of work to go in how we look at orientating these structures and looking at how they form and everything else. So there's a lot of work to go. The simple fact that there is a high grade position with that it just allows a lot more selectivity, which advances. So whether we have one seam, two seams, three seams, even with one seam, it's a very big step forward from a value proposition point of view and from what the influence on the economics will be. If there's multiples of this, and I think, going back to that section, I think on the first of the geological slides, we can see that orientation becomes really important because the historical drilling's being done vertically and it's being gridded and everything else as you would approach a nickel laterite style deposit. But if these seams are ending up in a sub-vertical fashion and everything else like that, there's high potential that more of these have been missed with the data density that we've gotten things. So to me, that's just an awful lot of upside. A key thing of what we're doing in our process is a lot of data analytics in what we're doing, as I said, but also it's really important that we are going to be, when we've got a couple more of these data sets in, we'll be effectively ripping all the data apart, looking at the best way to step forward and how we progress through a scoping study and everything else. And the reason I highlight that, it may mean that we go and do a small drill program to do some orientation drilling to really hone in on structure. to see how we can orientate, because the infill program is a significant program that we would need to do for a scoping study. And we want to make sure we get best bang for buck and how we optimize that as well. So all this work leads into how we move to a scoping study, and also the process of which we want to step through that scoping study.
Yeah, just want to say too, the initial reasons why we did the work, the initial testing is with the bulk testing is being repeated from the original testing. So in short, what we said from the start is still in play. It's actually got better. We're getting good upgrades. The vermiculite zones, if we can map them out accurately, will just give us some flexibility and give us a different option to the one ubiquitous model that we've been working on. But that ubiquitous model is still in play, and it's actually been better defined through the met testing that we've done as well. So it's not imperative that we have these seams, but certainly it could prove to be very lucrative if we can.
Yeah, gotcha. Tom, just one more. With regards to the rare earth indicators, can you elaborate further on the type of clay hosting and, if possible, any indications of potential recovery numbers?
Do you want to talk to the hosting around the fault orientation? Probably.
Well, I think that there's it's the unique mineralization of the clay zone, which is what got us going down this path in the first place. I think that the met testing that we're doing is showing that, you know, the critical part of this whole set this off was that we are trying to avoid HPEL, because you know traditionally nickel laterite nickel deposits need HPEL, but so our initial testing showed that we can separate out the products. We can get sellable products from simple beneficiation and just improving those products. Our financial modelling shows us that, you know, improving grade obviously improves the margin of those products. So it's this unique mineralogy. So most of the nickel is in clay, not in limonite. And we've also got this magnetite product, which is easily separated. So it is just the clays that we're dealing with, and we can separate the clay out. When we do that, we get a big upgrade in nickel, and that's what we're working on.
And I think it's important to say that the way we're going to approach the business case in this thing through the studies is our primary case is always our nickel cobalt. However, when we look at mining the nickel and cobalt, that we're going to get effectively a free carry on mining of both the scandium and the rare earths. And we're seeing, you know, encouraging work. There's still further work to go when we look at, you know, the additional gang removal we're doing and things like that. But certainly what we're interested in when it comes to scandium and rare earths is the upgrading capacity and where it ends up in which product stream. And that's really important, because our biggest value driver is nickel and cobalt. So we have to look at the way we engineer around that. But certainly we're seeing encouraging results on that, the upgrading of rare earths. That's certainly been encouraging so far. And certainly, you know, we want to look at that. And again, looking at the secondary, you know, the ability to get vermiculite potentially out as a product and the further secondary processing opportunities that opens up. And when you start looking at, you know, the opportunity of acid leaching and things like that around it, that also lends itself to the scandium in the potential. So, you know, we want to look at how those concentrate up. So the complexity is there's lots of levers, lots of products, but there's also a lot of value sitting there within the different products.
Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks to you both for taking the time to present today.
Thank you.